Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Carter Reed had always believed he knew Megan better than anyone else on earth. 13 years of marriage, 10-year-old twin boys, a colonial house in Myers Park, one of Charlotte's most traditional neighborhoods. At 41, Carter had built a solid career as a financial consultant, specializing in estate planning for high-income families. Megan, at 37, taught English literature at a prestigious private high school. To everyone around them, they were the couple that worked, balanced, respectful, present. Carter never imagined that this seemingly unshakable foundation could collapse in a single May afternoon. The invitation to Steve Morrison's wedding arrived in March. Steve was Carter's colleague at the consulting firm, a cheerful 45-year-old who'd finally decided to get married after a long engagement. The ceremony was set for the Ballantine Hotel, an elegant venue in South Charlotte, and Carter RSVP'd without hesitation. Megan seemed genuinely excited about the event, talking about the dress she'd wear and suggesting they hire a babysitter so they could enjoy the party without worries. The twins, Lucas and Emma, would be fine for a few hours. On the day of the wedding, Carter slipped into his favorite navy blue suit while watching Megan get ready in the bathroom. She'd chosen an emerald green dress that brought out her brown eyes, her blonde hair pinned up in an elaborate bun that left her neck exposed. She looked stunning, and Carter felt that familiar pride in having her by his side. He kissed her shoulder before they headed out to the car, unaware that this tender gesture would be one of the last of the marriage he thought he knew. The ceremony at the Ballantine was flawless. Steve and his bride, Patricia, exchanged vows under a white floral arch as the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the ballroom. Carter sat with Megan in the third row, holding her hand through the most emotional moments. He noticed she seemed a little distracted, her eyes drifting around the room more than usual, but he blamed it on the stress of her week. Megan had been grading exams and staying late for parent meetings. It was during the cocktail hour, before the reception, that Carter first noticed something strange. The event photographer, a man in his mid-30s with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, moved among the guests capturing candid moments. His name was Elliot, Carter heard Steve mention when introducing him to some guests as Charlotte's best wedding photographer. Elliot had that artsy vibe certain creative professionals cultivate, wearing a gray vest over a black shirt, moving with a kind of theatrical confidence. Carter was chatting with another colleague when his gaze casually landed on the scene, Megan, standing near the champagne table, staring directly at Elliot, who returned her gaze over the lens of his camera. It wasn't a fleeting glance, the kind you exchange out of politeness. It was something else. Intense. Intimate. As if they shared a secret that excluded everyone else in the room. Carter blinked, and when he looked again, Megan had turned away and Elliot was photographing another group. Maybe he'd imagined it. During dinner, Carter tried to shake off the unease. They were seated at a table with other couples from the firm, and conversation flowed naturally, work stories, summer plans. Megan participated, laughed at the right moments, occasionally touched Carter's arm. Everything seemed normal. Except that every time Elliot passed by to snap a photo of their table, Carter noticed Megan's eyes following him. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th, there was no denying it. The cake was cut at 9 p.m., followed by the couple's first dance. Carter pulled Megan onto the floor when the music shifted to something livelier, and they danced together for 2 songs. She smiled, but there was something missing in that smile, as if part of her was somewhere else. When the music slowed and Carter suggested they get more wine, Megan said she needed to use the restroom. He nodded and headed for the bar. 15 minutes passed. Carter chatted with Steve, congratulated Patricia again, accepted a glass of red wine he didn't really want to drink. 20 minutes. He scanned the ballroom for Megan's emerald green dress but didn't see her. 25 minutes. The unease settled into something heavier in his stomach. He set the glass down and walked toward the restrooms. The hallway was empty. He waited a few more minutes, watching two other women come and go. None of them were Megan. Carter decided to check other areas. Maybe she'd run into someone and stop to talk. He walked through the hotel lobby, checked the terrace where a few smokers had gathered, returned to the main ballroom. Nothing. It was when he went to check the parking lot that he saw her. Megan was walking along the side of the building, emerging from an area that led to the hotel's back entrance. Her face was slightly flushed, a redness creeping up her neck to her cheeks. The lipstick she'd carefully applied before leaving home was smudged at the corner of her lower lip. Her hair, once perfectly pinned, had loose strands at the nape of her neck. She stopped when she saw him, and for a fraction of a second, something passed through her eyes, surprise mixed with something Carter would later recognize as guilt. But it was quick, and then Megan smiled, stepping toward him with steps that looked deliberately casual. "There you are," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "I needed some fresh air. It was stuffy in there." Carter glanced behind her, toward where she'd come from. There was nothing there but a service area and trash bins. Not exactly the kind of place someone would choose to get fresh air. "You okay?" he asked, studying her face. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" Megan ran her hand through her hair, trying to smooth the loose strands. "Let's go back. I think they're about to toss the bouquet." Carter nodded slowly, letting her lead him back inside. But as they walked, he glanced one last time behind him and saw Elliot emerging from the same area, adjusting his camera strap over his shoulder. Elliot didn't look in their direction, but there was something in his posture, the tension in his shoulders, that made Carter's stomach drop. The next morning, Carter woke before the alarm. Megan was sleeping deeply beside him, her face peaceful against the white pillow. He watched her for long minutes, searching those familiar features for any sign of what was growing inside him. Doubt. Fear. A corrosive feeling that something fundamental had changed without him noticing. He got up quietly and went downstairs, making coffee while his thoughts spun. Maybe he was overreacting. Weddings were emotional events, people drank more than they should, the heat of the ballroom could explain the flush on her face. But the smudged lipstick? The loose hair? The coincidence of Elliot coming out of the same place minutes later? Carter was a man of numbers, patterns, analysis. And the patterns he saw didn't add up to anything innocent. When Megan came down for breakfast, he watched her closely as she recounted how much fun she'd had at the party, how beautiful Patricia looked, how excellent the food was. She didn't mention Elliot. She didn't mention her long absence. Carter didn't ask either. Not yet. It was at the office on Monday that Carter took his first concrete step. Between client meetings, he accessed their joint bank account, which they used for household expenses. Megan had her own salary and personal account, but the shared account received contributions from both of them for the mortgage, bills, and the twins' expenses. Carter rarely checked the statements in detail, trusting that Megan managed the household budget well. What he found made his heart race. Regular transfers to an account he didn't recognize, dating back 4 months. $500 here, $800 there, $1,200 last month. The total exceeded $12,000. Carter wrote down the account number and amounts, his hands trembling slightly as he did. There was no description on the transfers, just cold numbers telling a story he couldn't quite decode yet. That night, while Megan helped the twins with homework, Carter locked himself in the home office under the pretense of reviewing a client's documents. He opened his laptop and searched for the account number but found nothing useful. He needed professional help. He thought about confronting Megan directly, demanding answers, but something held him back. If she was hiding something this big, a direct question would only make her build more elaborate lies. Carter needed facts. Evidence. Certainty. On Wednesday, Carter contacted Richard Dunn, a private investigator a colleague had recommended years ago during a corporate due diligence case. Richard was discreet, efficient, and expensive, but Carter didn't care about the cost. He explained the situation in general terms. He suspected his wife was having an affair, there were unexplained financial transfers, and he needed answers quickly. "I can have something solid in 72 hours, Richard said over the phone, his voice professional and free of judgment. "I need basic info about her. Routine, job, car, appearance. And about the suspected person, if you have it." Carter gave him everything. The name of the school where Megan taught, her schedule, the model of her car. He described Elliot based on what he remembered from the wedding, including the names Steve had mentioned. Richard promised daily updates. The next 3 days were the longest of Carter's life. He maintained a facade of normalcy at home, eating dinner with the family, watching TV with the twins, lying beside Megan every night. Every interaction felt rehearsed, every smile of hers now carried shadows he couldn't ignore. Megan showed no signs of anything different, which paradoxically deepened Carter's anguish. How could she be so natural? How many times had she done this before? On Friday afternoon, Richard called. "I've got the full dossier," he said. "Want me to bring it over or email it?" "Email it," Carter replied, his voice hoarse. The file arrived an hour later. Carter opened it in his office at work, after making sure the door was locked and no one would interrupt. What he read on the following pages systematically shattered every illusion he'd still held about his marriage. Megan had been having an affair with Elliot Mercer for 6 months, not 4, as the transfers suggested. Richard documented regular meetings, usually on Wednesday afternoons when Megan said she had department meetings, and occasionally on Saturday mornings when she claimed she was going to the gym. Photos showed them entering an apartment in South End, Charlotte's modern and expensive neighborhood. The same apartment the transfers were going to. Megan had rented the space specifically for their meetings, paying with money from their joint account. There was more. Elliot Mercer, the charismatic photographer, was married. His wife, Danielle, was 8 months pregnant. Richard included that detail almost as an afterthought, but for Carter it was a punch to the gut. Megan wasn't just betraying her husband, she was actively participating in the destruction of another family, a family that would welcome a baby in just a few weeks. Carter shut his laptop and sat motionless for several minutes, the office silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. He felt nausea rise in his throat and swallowed repeatedly, trying to hold it back. $12,000. 6 months of lies. A secret apartment. A pregnant wife being deceived. His own wife, the woman who'd promised fidelity 13 years ago, transformed into someone he didn't recognize. The pain came in waves. First, the betrayal itself, the physical act he now knew had happened. Then the premeditation, the rented apartment showing cold planning. Then the theft, because using joint account money without consent was exactly that. And finally, the cruelty of dragging in another family, another wife, another marriage into her web of lies. Carter left the office at 6 p.m., driving home on autopilot. When he arrived, Megan was preparing dinner while the twins did homework at the kitchen table. A perfect domestic scene. He kissed the top of Lucas's head, hugged Emma, and sat down to eat with the family. Megan talked about her day at school, a troublesome student, a colleague on leave. Carter responded at the right moments, but his mind was working at full speed. He wouldn't confront Megan alone. He wouldn't give her the chance to control the narrative, to reshape the situation, to play with his emotions. Carter wanted her to feel the full weight of her choices, and for that, he needed a witness who would make it impossible to reverse or minimize. On Saturday, while Megan took the twins to swimming lessons, Carter sat with the dossier and laid out his plan. It wouldn't be revenge in the petty sense. It would be exposure. Truth brought into the light in a way that couldn't be denied or minimized. He found Danielle Mercer's contact information in the dossier. Richard had been meticulous. Carter typed a careful message, introducing himself as someone with important information about her husband. He asked to meet her in person, at a public place of her choosing. He explained it was urgent and involved her well-being and the baby's. The reply came 2 hours later. Danielle agreed to meet him on Tuesday at a cafe in Dilworth. Her tone was cautious but curious. On Monday, Carter reserved a table at Lumière, Meghan's favorite French restaurant, for Wednesday lunch. He told her he wanted to celebrate a promotion he'd received at work, which was true, even though the promotion had happened weeks ago. Meghan seemed genuinely happy, commenting that they hadn't had a weekday lunch together in a long time. On Tuesday, Carter met Danielle Mercer. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe 28, with shoulder-length brown hair and blue eyes that showed exhaustion. The pregnancy was obvious beneath the summer dress she wore. They sat at a corner table, and Carter went straight in. "Your husband is having an affair with my wife," he said, placing a folder on the table. "I have documented proof. Photos, dates, the apartment they rented. I didn't come to cause pain, but because you deserve to know the truth before you have this baby." Danielle paled. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, as if protecting the child from information she couldn't change. Carter pushed the folder toward her but didn't force her to open it. He explained how he'd discovered it, the Steve wedding, the exchanged glances, Meghan's disappearance, the bank transfers that led him to the detective. "Why are you telling me this?" Danielle asked, her voice trembling. "Because my wife isn't the only one at fault here. And because you deserve to make decisions about your future based on the truth, not lies." Danielle opened the folder with hands that shook. The photos were there, dated and time-stamped. Elliot and Meghan entering the apartment. Leaving hours later. Relaxed, intimate expressions. In one photo, Elliot had his hand on Meghan's waist while she laughed at something. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment. "I suspected," she whispered. The Wednesdays he said he had photo sessions. The Saturday mornings he said he was editing at the studio. I didn't want to believe it. Carter understood perfectly. He hadn't wanted to believe it either. "Tomorrow I'm confronting my wife," he said. "I booked lunch at a public restaurant. She won't be able to escape or create scenes. If you want to be there, if you want to confront Elliot too, I can include you. But I understand if you'd rather handle this another way." Danielle sat in silence for long minutes, her eyes fixed on the photos. When she finally looked at Carter, there was something beyond the pain in her gaze. Determination. "I'll be there," she said. "Elliot needs to look me in the eye when he finds out it's over." They made the details. Danielle would arrive at the restaurant 15 minutes after Carter and Meghan, when he'd already begun presenting the evidence. Her appearance would be the final blow, the living proof that Meghan's actions had real consequences on real people. Wednesday arrived with a cloudy sky, fitting for what was coming. Carter dressed carefully, choosing a suit Meghan had always praised. He wanted to look like the man she knew, not the man her betrayal had turned him into. They met at Lumière at noon. Meghan was radiant in a light blue dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, smiling as she saw him already seated at the reserved table. "This table is perfect," she said, sitting down. "You can see the garden from here." Carter nodded, asking the waiter to bring water for both before ordering. When they were alone, he took a deep breath. "Meghan, we're not here to celebrate my promotion." She frowned, the smile faltering. "No? Then why?" Carter placed the folder he'd brought on the table, the same one he'd shown Danielle. "We're here because you need to explain what these $12,000 in transfers from our joint account to an apartment in South End are." Color drained from Meghan's face instantly. She looked at the folder, then at Carter, eyes wide. "Carter, And before you make up any story," he continued, opening the folder and spreading some photos across the table, "I want you to know I hired a detective. I know about Elliot. I know about the 6 months. I know about the Wednesdays and Saturdays. I know everything." Meghan fell silent, her chin trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the photos, each one an undeniable proof of her betrayal. In one, she and Elliot were kissing in the apartment parking lot, the image captured with brutal clarity. "Interesting choice of a public restaurant," Carter said, his voice controlled but sharp. "The same place where you asked me to marry you, remember? 14 years ago, at that table by the window. You said you loved me and that you'd never met anyone as honest as me. Ironic, don't you think?" Megan opened her mouth to speak, but Carter raised his hand. "I'm not done. Did you know Elliot is married? His wife, Danielle, is 8 months pregnant. 8 months, Megan. While you two rented an apartment and played at being a couple, she was at home waiting for her first child, believing she had a faithful husband." Tears began to stream down Megan's face. "Carter, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you fell in love with him? That our marriage had problems I didn't notice? That it was a mistake that grew too big? Spare me the clichés." At that moment, a shadow approached the table. Megan looked up and froze completely. Danielle Mercer was there, her maternity dress highlighting her 8-month belly, her eyes red but her expression composed. "You must be Megan," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting as if she'd been invited. "I'm Danielle. The wife of your lover. The pregnant wife, to be more specific." Megan seemed to shrink into her chair, all the blood draining from her face. Her eyes darted between Carter and Danielle, like a trapped animal searching for an escape. "I didn't know," Megan began. "Didn't know I existed? Or didn't know I was pregnant?" Danielle interrupted, her voice steady despite the situation. "Because Elliot wears a ring. The same ring I put on his finger 3 years ago. Hard not to notice, unless you chose not to see." Carter watched the scene, feeling a bitter mix of satisfaction and deep sadness. There was no pleasure in seeing Megan crumble, only certainty that the truth needed to be spoken. "The most painful part," Danielle continued, leaning forward, "is that I spent the last few months planning the baby's room, choosing names, imagining what our family would be like. Meanwhile, my husband was with you, spending time and energy that should have been ours. You stole from me a pregnancy that should have been happy." Megan was sobbing now, with no words to defend herself. Other diners were beginning to notice the scene, but Carter didn't care. "Let them see. Let them know. I'm filing for divorce," Carter said, his voice calm and final. "I've already consulted a lawyer. In North Carolina, we need a year of separation before finalization, but the process starts now. You'll leave the house by the end of the week. The twins will stay with me during the transition. We'll discuss formal custody later, but Lucas and Emma deserve stability, and clearly, you're not the one who can provide that right now." Megan finally found her voice. "Carter, please. The boys need me. It was a terrible mistake, I know, but don't destroy our family because." "You destroyed our family," he cut in. 6 months ago. Every time you lied about where you were, every time you used our money to pay for that apartment, every time you slept beside me pretending nothing had changed. You made choices, Megan. Repeatedly. Now you live with the consequences." Danielle stood up, smoothing her dress over her belly. "I'm going. I need to process all this before I confront Elliot. But I want you to know, Megan, you didn't just destroy 2 marriages. You affected a child who hasn't even been born yet. Think about that during your sleepless nights." She left the restaurant with measured steps, leaving Carter and Megan in heavy silence. The waiter appeared hesitantly, asking if they'd like to order. Carter politely declined. "How did you find out?" Megan finally asked, her voice weak. "The Steve wedding. I saw you exchanging glances all afternoon. When you disappeared for half an hour and came back with smudged lipstick and messy hair, followed minutes later by Elliot leaving from the same place, I didn't need to be a genius. The bank transfers confirmed it. The detective gave me the rest. Megan rubbed her eyes, smearing her makeup. He told me he'd leave Danielle. That their marriage was over. That once the baby was born, he'd file for divorce. And you believed him. It wasn't a question. Carter knew the lies lovers tell, the empty promises that sustain affairs. I felt invisible, Megan said. With you always working, the boys growing up and needing me less the same way. Elliot made me feel desired, special. Carter shook his head slowly. So instead of talking to me, suggesting therapy, being honest about what you felt, you chose to betray. You chose to lie. You chose to spend our money. You chose to destroy another family along with ours. Don't blame loneliness for your decisions, Megan. Take responsibility for them, at least once. He stood up, leaving enough money on the table to cover any charges and a good tip. He gathered the folder with the evidence. I hope your things are out of the house by Sunday. I'll explain to the boys we're separating, without details for now. When they're older and ask, I won't lie. But for now, they deserve protection. He walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving Megan alone with the wreckage of her choices. The year that followed was one of rebuilding. Carter stayed in the Myers Park house with the twins, who were initially confused and sad about their parents' separation. Family therapy helped, both for him and the boys. Megan rented a small apartment in Ballantyne and maintained bi-weekly visits the twins accepted with little enthusiasm. Lucas and Emma were smart enough to sense something serious had happened, even without knowing the details, and naturally gravitated toward the father who remained constant. The story leaked into the social circle, as it always does. Teachers at Megan's school heard rumors. Other parents commented. Megan resigned at the end of the school year, citing a need for change, but everyone knew. Elliot Mercer was confronted by Danielle the day after the restaurant lunch. She went into labor 2 weeks later and filed for divorce before even being discharged from the hospital. Elliot lost clients when the story spread among Charlotte's photographers, his reputation for professionalism stained by his personal conduct. Carter finalized the divorce as soon as North Carolina's required separation period was complete. The division of assets was relatively straightforward, both had their own careers, and the judge considered Megan's financial misappropriation when setting terms. He kept the house, paying her share. Custody was officially shared, but in practice, the twins chose to live primarily with their father. Emma, especially, showed resentment toward the mother she couldn't disguise. 18 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, Carter sat on his back porch on a Sunday afternoon, watching Lucas and Emma play video games in the living room. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something manageable, a scar that reminded but didn't prevent him from living. He'd picked up old hobbies again, returned to morning runs, even accepted a few dinner invites friends kept arranging. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Danielle Mercer. They kept sporadic contact, bound by their shared experience of betrayal. She'd attached a photo of her daughter, now 1 year old, a girl with chubby cheeks and a toothless grin. Sophie took her first steps today. I thought you'd want to know that not everything that came out of that disaster was bad. Thank you for being honest with me. Carter smiled genuinely for the first time in a long time. He replied with congratulations and best wishes for both of them. When he put the phone down, he realized the anger he'd carried for so long was finally beginning to fade. He hadn't forgiven Megan, maybe he never would fully, but he no longer needed to carry the weight of resentment. The twins called him for dinner, breaking his reflection. Carter rose from the porch and walked into the home he'd rebuilt as a haven. It wasn't the life he'd planned at 28 when he married. It wasn't the future he'd imagined when the twins were born. But it was a life built on truth instead of lies, and that, he was slowly discovering, meant more than any illusion of perfection. Megan eventually moved to Raleigh, restarting her career at another school. Elliot, Carter learned from mutual friends, also left Charlotte, the city too small to hold his ruined reputation. Danielle thrived as a single mother, devoted to her daughter and the new life she'd built. And Carter? Carter had learned that betrayed trust leaves deep marks, but doesn't have to define who we are. That painful truths are still better than comfortable lies. And that rebuilding a life from the wreckage of betrayal takes courage, time, and the willingness to believe that better days exist beyond the present pain. Slowly, those days were coming. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.